virgin forced to marry an arrogant CEO. But after one night, everything changed. Kimberly stood in the marble bathroom of the penthouse, staring at her reflection like it belonged to someone else. Her wedding dress, custom Vera Wang, probably worth more than her entire college tuition, hung perfectly on her frame, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was wearing a costume. Outside the door, she could hear the low murmur of Manhattan's elite gathering for a reception she never wanted. She pressed her palms against the cool sink and closed her eyes. This morning I woke up single. Tonight I'm Mrs. Richard Ashford. The name tasted bitter. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it wasn't hers by choice. 3 months ago, her father's pharmaceutical company had collapsed under the weight of bad investments and worse decisions. On the board had given him two options: declare bankruptcy and destroy the legacy his grandfather built, or accept a merger with Ashford Industries. The catch? Richard Ashford didn't want a business partner. He wanted a wife. Not love, not even attraction, just a calculated move to soften his ruthless reputation before his company went public. And somehow Kimberly had become the bargaining chip. She'd said yes, not because she wanted to, but because her father's eyes had looked so desperate, so broken, that she couldn't bear to be the reason he lost everything. So she'd signed papers, smiled for engagement photos, and let herself be dressed up like a doll for a wedding that felt more like a corporate merger than a marriage. The bathroom door opened without a knock. Kimberly's eyes flew open, meeting Richard's reflection in the mirror. As he stood in the doorway, bow tie loosened, top button undone, looking like he just stepped out of a magazine spread titled "Billionaires Who Don't Give a Damn." His dark hair was slightly disheveled, probably from the number of society women who'd tried to touch it during the reception, and his gray eyes held that same cool detachment they always did. "They're waiting for the first dance," he said flatly. "I needed a minute." "You've had 10. Kimberly turned to face him, something sharp rising in her chest. "I'm sorry my emotional breakdown is inconvenient for your schedule." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment she thought he might actually say something human. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Whenever you're ready, wife." The word sounded like an insult. Kimberly lifted her chin and walked past him, their shoulders almost brushing. She caught the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and cedar dark, and hated that she noticed. The reception hall was a blur of champagne flutes and false congratulations. Everyone knew this wasn't a love match. The tabloids had been brutal. Ashford buys a bride, from bankruptcy to the bedroom, the marriage merger. Kimberly had stopped reading after the first week. Richard's hand settled on her lower back as they stepped onto the dance floor, and she flinched before she could stop herself. His fingers stilled, and when she glanced up, something flickered across his face too quickly to name. The music started, some instrumental piece his wedding planner had chosen, and he pulled her close with the mechanical precision of someone who'd taken ballroom lessons but never actually wanted to dance. "Smile," he murmured against her ear. "You look like you're at a funeral." "Feels like one," she whispered back. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "We had a deal." "I know." "Then stop looking at me like I'm forcing you into this." Kimberly's breath caught. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and for the first time all day, she let him see exactly what she was feeling. "Aren't you?" Something in his expression cracked, just for a second. Then the mask slid back into place, smooth and impenetrable as glass. "This was your father's choice," Richard said quietly. "Not mine. But you're the one who made the offer." He didn't deny it. The song ended, and the crowd applauded politely. Richard released her immediately, stepping back like she'd burned him. He adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous habit she'd noticed during their 3 awkward getting-to-know-you dinners, and cleared his throat. "I have some business to handle," he said, The car will take you to the penthouse when you're ready to leave. You're not coming? I'll be late. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd of congratulations and business handshakes, leaving Kimberly alone in her wedding dress in a room full of strangers. Later that night, the penthouse was too quiet. Kimberly sat on the edge of the massive California king bed, still in her dress because she couldn't reach the buttons on her own and refused to call the housekeeper. The city glittered below her through floor-to-ceiling windows, and she felt like she was floating above her own life, watching someone else live it. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Mira. "How are you holding up?" Kimberly stared at the screen, her throat tight. How was she supposed to answer that? "I married a man who looks at me like I'm a quarterly report. I'm 25 and my life is already over. I don't know if I want to cry or scream." She typed back, "I'm fine." Another buzz. Mira again. "Liar. Call me when you can." Kimberly set the phone down and stood, trying once more to reach the buttons. Her fingers fumbled uselessly at her spine. "Need help?" She spun around. Richard stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his jacket gone, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, like the armor he wore all day had finally gotten too heavy. "I thought you'd be gone all night," Kimberly said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I changed my mind." He crossed the room slowly, giving her time to object. When she didn't, he stepped behind her, and she felt his fingers at the top button. They were careful, methodical. Not the touch of a man who wanted his wife, but the touch of someone completing a task. Button by button, he worked his way down her spine, and Kimberly held her breath, acutely aware of how intimate this was despite how clinical it felt. "You can breathe," Richard said softly. "I don't want to." His fingers paused. "Why not?" "Because if I do, this becomes real." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Richard's hand settled warm against her bare shoulder blade, just for a second, before he stepped back. "It's already real," he said quietly. Kimberly turned to face him, clutching the front of her dress to keep it from falling. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold calculation. She saw exhaustion, maybe even regret. "I'll sleep in the guest room," he added, already moving toward the door. "Richard," he stopped, his back to her. "Why did you really want to get married?" His shoulders tensed. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me." He turned halfway, and the look in his eyes made her chest ache. "Because I'm tired of being alone." Then he left, closing the door so softly behind him that Kimberly barely heard it. She stood there in her wedding dress, feeling something shift in the carefully constructed walls around her heart, something that felt dangerously like understanding. What had she just married into? Kimberly woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting realization that she was in Richard Ashford's bed. Her bed now, technically, though nothing about the sprawling penthouse felt like hers. She'd fallen asleep alone, still half-dressed in her slip, too exhausted to care about propriety or the fact that her wedding night had ended with her husband sleeping in another room. The smell of coffee drifted from somewhere beyond the bedroom door. She sat up slowly, running her hands through her tangled hair. On the nightstand, she found a note in sharp, precise handwriting. "There's breakfast in the kitchen. Help yourself. I'll be in my office. Tojiri, no good morning." No, how did you sleep? Just instructions, like she was a guest in a hotel. Kimberly crumpled the note and tossed it aside. She found one of Richard's dress shirts hanging in the walk-in closet, navy blue still crisp from the dry cleaner, and pulled it on over her slip. It fell to mid-thigh, the sleeves swallowing her hands. She rolled them up and padded barefoot into the main living space. The penthouse was absurdly beautiful in daylight, all clean lines and expensive neutrals, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than most people's salaries. Everything looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Nothing looked lived in. She found the kitchen.
If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more amazing love stories. All right, back to the story.
All marble and stainless steel, and the promised breakfast. A spread of pastries, fresh fruit, and a French press of coffee that was probably cold by now. A small card sat beside it. From Mays and Kaiser, the almond croissants are supposedly the best in the city. Supposedly, like he'd never tried them himself. Kimberly poured herself coffee and took a croissant, eating standing up because sitting at the enormous dining table alone felt too depressing. Through an open door down the hall, she could hear the low murmur of Richard's voice, on a call probably, always working. She'd learned that much during their brief courtship, if you could even call it that. 3 dinners, 2 charity galas where they'd been photographed together, and one excruciating afternoon tea with his publicist who'd coached her on how to smile for the cameras. He was always on his phone, always halfway out the door to the next meeting, the next deal. And the man was married to his work long before he'd married her. "You're up." Kimberly turned to find Richard standing in the kitchen doorway, dressed in charcoal gray slacks and a white dress shirt, no tie. He looked put together in that effortless way that probably took a team of stylists to achieve. His hair was still damp from a shower. "I'm up," she confirmed, suddenly self-conscious in his oversized shirt. His eyes flicked down to what she was wearing, then quickly back to her face. "That's my shirt. I didn't pack loungewear. I wasn't exactly thinking clearly yesterday." She lifted her chin. "Is that a problem?" "No." He cleared his throat and moved to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup with movements that were almost robotic in their efficiency. "See, I had my assistant arrange for some of your things to be brought over from your apartment. They should arrive this afternoon." "Thank you. You'll need a credit card for personal expenses." He pulled out his wallet and extracted a black American Express card, setting it on the counter between them like it might bite. "There's no limit. Buy whatever you need." Kimberly stared at the card. "I'm not a kept woman. You're my wife. Those aren't the same thing." Richard's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to make this easier. By throwing money at me? By making sure you're comfortable." His voice remained level, controlled, but she caught the edge underneath. "Unless you'd prefer to be uncomfortable, I'd prefer to be treated like a person instead of an acquisition." The words hung in the air between them. Richard set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, and when he looked at her, something in his expression shifted. Not anger, something closer to exhaustion. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" "This. Marriage. The, domestic parts." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "I've never lived with anyone. I don't know what you want from me." The admission caught Kimberly off guard. She'd expected arrogance, entitlement, the cold dismissiveness he'd shown yesterday, not this raw honesty. "I don't know either," she admitted. "I've never been married before." "Then we're both learning." A beat of silence. Then unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "What?" Kimberly asked. "You have croissant flakes on your face." She wiped at her cheek self-consciously. "Where?" "Other side." He stepped closer, and before she could react, his thumb brushed the corner of her mouth. The touch was brief, professional almost, but it sent a jolt through her that she absolutely did not want to analyze. Richard pulled back immediately, clearing his throat. "I have meetings all day. There's a car and driver at your disposal if you want to go anywhere. Marcus will take you wherever you need." "What if I just want to walk?" He frowned. "In the city?" "Yes, Richard. In the city. Like a normal person." "You're not a normal person anymore. You're—" He stopped himself. "Your wife?" Kimberly finished. "Or your liability?" "High profile," he said carefully. "The press has been relentless. I'd prefer you had security. I'd prefer to have my life back. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and then she watched something flicker across his face. Hurt, maybe, or just irritation that she wasn't being compliant. I have to go, Richard said, already moving toward the door. Then he paused, his back to her. For what it's worth, I meant what I said last night. About being tired of being alone? Yes. Then why does it feel like you're running away from me every chance you get? He didn't answer, just grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair and disappeared into the elevator, leaving Kimberly alone in his enormous, empty penthouse with a black credit card and the lingering warmth of his thumb against her skin. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Richard left early and came home late. They orbited each other like planets on different paths, polite, distant, careful not to collide. He slept in the guest room. She slept in his bed. They never discussed it. On Thursday afternoon, Kimberly's belongings arrived, boxes of clothes, books, the framed photo of her and her parents from her college graduation. She unpacked slowly, trying to make some corner of the penthouse feel like hers. She was hanging dresses in the walk-in closet when she heard voices in the living room. Absolutely insane, Rich. You can't just disappear into work and expect her to be fine with it. Kimberly froze, recognizing the voice. Daniel Chen, Richard's best friend and CFO. She'd met him once at the engagement party. Charming, warm, everything Richard wasn't. I'm handling it, Richard said curtly. By avoiding her? That's your strategy? I'm giving her space. You're giving her isolation. A pause. Look, I know this wasn't conventional, but she's your wife now. You have to actually talk to her. I talked to her. About what? The weather? Stock prices? Daniel's voice softened. Come on, man. I saw the way you looked at her at the wedding. This doesn't have to be just a business arrangement. Silence. Then Richard's voice, so quiet, Kimberly almost missed it. It's better if it is. Why? Because she didn't choose me. She chose saving her father. And I'd rather she resent the arrangement than resent me. Kimberly's chest tightened. She pressed her back against the closet wall, hardly breathing. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say, Daniel replied. And I've heard you pitch some terrible ideas. Daniel, no, listen. You wanted a wife. You have one. A smart, beautiful woman who could actually make you happy if you pull your head out of your ass long enough to let her. But instead, you're hiding behind this noble martyr bullshit. She's 25. She should be out living her life, not trapped in a marriage she didn't want. Then ask her what she wants. Jesus, Rich. For someone brilliant, you can be incredibly stupid about people. Footsteps. The sound of the elevator. Then silence. Kimberly stayed in the closet for a long moment, processing what she'd heard. Richard's voice echoing in her head. She didn't choose me. The worst part was that he wasn't wrong, but he also wasn't completely right. That evening, Kimberly made a decision. She ordered dinner, real dinner, not the sad takeout she'd been eating alone in the kitchen, and set the table in the dining room. Candles, because why not? Wine, because she needed it. When Richard came home at 9, earlier than usual, probably because Daniel had chewed him out, he stopped short at the sight of the table. What's this? He asked carefully. Dinner. I see that. So sit down. She gestured to the chair across from her. Richard hesitated, then slowly lowered himself into the seat, watching her like she might explode. Kimberly, I heard you today, she interrupted, talking with Daniel. His face went carefully blank. How much did you hear? Enough. She poured them both wine, her hands steady despite the nervous energy thrumming through her. You're right. I didn't choose you. But you didn't choose me either. Not really. You chose a solution to a PR problem. So we're even. That's not... Let me finish. She met his eyes across the table. I don't want to spend the next however many years avoiding each other. I don't want to be the ghost who lives in your penthouse while you hide in your office. And I definitely don't want you making decisions about what I want without actually asking me. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. What do you want? Honestly, I don't know yet. She took a breath. But I know I don't want to be your obligation or your guilt. I want, I want us to at least try to be friends or roommates or whatever version of this doesn't feel like we're both serving a life sentence. Something shifted in his expression. The walls didn't come down exactly, but they cracked a little. I can try that, he said quietly. Yeah? Yeah. He picked up his wine glass, and for the first time since she'd known him, he almost smiled. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at friendship. I find that hard to believe. Ask Daniel. I've known him for 15 years and I still forget his birthday. When is it? See, I have no idea. Kimberly laughed before she could stop herself, and Richard's almost smile grew into something real. It transformed his face, softened the hard edges she'd thought were permanent. There, he said, that's the first time I've heard you laugh. Maybe you should be funny more often. I'll add it to my calendar. Thursday at 8, be amusing for wife. Our anniversary is on a Saturday. I know. Do you know the date? He rattled it off without hesitation, and Kimberly felt something warm unfurl in her chest. A beginning, maybe just a small one, but still, a beginning. They ate dinner. They talked, carefully at first, then easier. About her work as a grant writer for nonprofits, about his company, the pressure of going public, about how neither of them knew how to cook anything more complicated than toast. And when Richard laughed, really laughed, at her story about accidentally setting off the fire alarm trying to make scrambled eggs, Kimberly realized something that terrified her. I could fall for him. Not yet, not even close. But the possibility was there, humming between them like a live wire. And she had no idea if that would save them or destroy them both. The fragile peace lasted exactly 11 days. On a Tuesday morning, Kimberly woke to find Richard already dressed, pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was clipped, controlled, but she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders. Something was wrong. Don't care what the board thinks. I'm not doing it. A pause. Because it's invasive and unnecessary. Another pause, longer this time. His hand dragged through his hair. Fine. Send me the details. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, staring out at the city like it held answers. What happened? Kimberly asked from the hallway. Richard turned, and she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. The board is concerned about optics. What kind of optics? The kind where we've been married for almost 2 weeks and haven't been seen together outside of the wedding. He set his phone down with deliberate care. They think it looks suspicious. Suspicious how? Like it's not a real marriage? Kimberly crossed her arms, something cold settling in her stomach. It's not a real marriage. They don't know that. Richard's jaw tightened. The whole point was to soften my image before the IPO. A billionaire who gets married looks stable, family-oriented, human. A billionaire who gets married and then immediately lives separately from his wife looks like he bought a trophy he doesn't even want. So what do they want? They want us to play the part. Public appearances, social media presence, a charity gala this weekend. He paused. And they want us to take a honeymoon. Kimberly laughed, sharp and bitter. A honeymoon? Are you kidding? I told them it was ridiculous. Good. They said if we don't, they'll delay the IPO pending a review of my personal conduct. His voice was flat, resigned. Which means everything I've built for the past 10 years gets put on hold because a bunch of 70-year-old men don't think I'm lovesick enough for their comfort. Kimberly sank onto the couch, processing. How long? The honeymoon? 2 weeks. They've already arranged everything. A villa in Santorini. Private, secluded. They'll leak a few photos to the press, and that should satisfy the narrative. 2 weeks alone. With you. I know it's not ideal. It's not ideal. She looked up at him, and he had the decency to flinch. Richard, we've barely managed to be roommates for 11 days. You want to lock us in a villa together for 2 weeks and pretend to be in love? I don't want to do any of this. He moved to sit across from her, and for once he looked as trapped as she felt. But if I don't, everything falls apart. The company, the merger, your father's business, all of it. And there it was, the invisible chain that bound them both. Kimberly closed her eyes. When do we leave? Friday. 2 days. She had 2 days to prepare for an intimate vacation with a man who was essentially a stranger, a man who made her laugh over dinner but disappeared into his office immediately after, a man whose rare smiles did dangerous things to her pulse. Fine, she said, but we need rules. Rules! If we're going to sell this, we need to be on the same page. She met his gaze. No more disappearing acts. If we're together, we're actually together. Present. Engaged. Richard nodded slowly. Agreed. And no lies between us. The world can have whatever story they want, but when it's just us, we're honest. Done. And separate bedrooms. Something flickered in his expression. The villa only has one. Kimberly's stomach flipped. You're joking. They specifically requested something romantic. Apparently, romantic means one master suite with a view of the caldera. He rubbed his temples. I'll sleep on the couch. For 2 weeks? I've slept in airport lounges. I'll survive. She studied him. The exhaustion in his eyes, the tight set of his shoulders, the way he was already mentally preparing to be uncomfortable for her sake. And despite everything, she felt something soften. We'll figure it out when we get there, she said quietly. Richard looked at her like she just offered him something precious. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this. I already regret most of my life choices. What's one more? Kimberly surprised herself by smiling. Was that a joke, mister? It a Ashford? I'm trying to be amusing for my wife. Thursdays at 8, remember? It's Tuesday. I'm overachieving. This time when she laughed, it didn't feel quite so complicated. Friday arrived too quickly. Kimberly stood in the penthouse bedroom, staring at her open suitcase like it might tell her what to pack for a fake honeymoon with her increasingly confusing husband. Swimsuits felt too intimate. Evening gowns felt too formal. Everything felt like a costume for a role she didn't know how to play. Need help? She turned to find Richard in the doorway, wearing dark jeans and a white linen shirt, the most casual she'd ever seen him. He looked younger somehow, less armor-plated. I don't know what to bring, she admitted. He stepped into the room, hands in his pockets. The weather will be warm. Casual during the day, maybe one or two nicer outfits for if we go into town. He paused. And you should bring a swimsuit. There's a pool. Will you use it? Probably not. Then why should I? Richard's mouth quirked. Because unlike me, you might actually enjoy a vacation. This isn't a vacation. It's a performance. It can be both. He moved to her suitcase, looking at the carefully folded clothes. You're overthinking this. I'm a chronic overthinker. It's one of my defining traits. I've noticed. What else have you noticed? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she watched Richard go still. When he looked at her, something in his eyes made her breath catch. That you bite your lip when you're nervous, he said quietly. That you drink your coffee black, but doctor it with so much cream it's basically beige. That you rearrange the books on the shelf by color, even though you think organizing by author makes more sense. That you're trying really hard to make the best of a situation you never asked for. Kimberly's heart hammered against her ribs. That's oddly specific. I pay attention. to business deals, to everything. He stepped back, breaking whatever moment had formed between them. The car leaves in an hour. Pack light. We can buy anything you forget. He left before she could respond, and Kimberly stood there with her half-packed suitcase and the uncomfortable realization that Richard Ashford had been watching her when she thought he wasn't looking. And worse, she'd been watching him too. The private jet was obscene. Kimberly had been on planes before, obviously, but this was different. In cream leather seats that reclined into beds, a full bar, windows so large she felt like she was flying through the sky rather than in it. Richard sat across from her, laptop open, already working. Some things never changed. "Do you ever stop?" she asked. He looked up, distracted. "Stop what?" "Working. Not if I can help it." He closed the laptop partway. "Does it bother you?" "I don't know yet." She tucked her legs under her, getting comfortable. "Why do you do it?" "Do what?" "Work yourself to death. You're already a billionaire. You could retire tomorrow and live 10 lifetimes on what you've made. So why the obsession?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might deflect. But then he surprised her. "Because if I stop moving, I have to think about how lonely I am," he said simply. And the honesty of it hit her square in the chest. "Is that why you wanted to get married?" she asked softly. "You thought it would fix the loneliness." "I thought it might make it more bearable." He met her eyes. "I was wrong. It just made me more aware of it." "Richard, I know what you're going to say, that I should have tried dating like a normal person, that buying a wife was insane." His smile was self-deprecating. "Daniel says the same thing at least once a week." "I wasn't going to say that." "No? I was going to say that I understand." Kimberly leaned forward. "I've been lonely too, even before all this. I spent my 20s building a career I was passionate about while watching all my friends fall in love and get married and start families, and I told myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need that, that I was complete on my own." She swallowed. "But I wasn't. I'm not." Richard's gaze was intense, searching. "So we're both just lonely people who got trapped in a marriage neither of us wanted. Maybe," she bit her lip, "or maybe we're two lonely people who have a chance to be less lonely together. Is that what you want?" "I think so." She took a breath. "What about you?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I want to try." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was honest, and right now, honesty felt like enough. "Then let's try," Kimberly said. Richard closed his laptop completely and moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. He didn't touch her, but the nearness was its own kind of intimacy. "2 weeks," he said. "No work. Not no board, just us figuring this out." "You think you can go 2 weeks without working?" "I think if I don't, you'll throw my laptop into the Aegean Sea." "I absolutely would." "See? You're already making me a better person." Kimberly smiled despite herself. And when Richard smiled back, really smiled, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes, she felt the first real flutter of hope. Maybe this forced proximity wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was an opportunity. And maybe, just maybe, they could figure out how to build something real from this arranged foundation. The plane soared toward Greece, carrying two people who were married but strangers, together but apart, scared but hoping. And for the first time since she'd said "I do," Kimberly let herself believe that hope might be enough. The villa was a problem, not because it wasn't beautiful. It was stunning. White stucco walls, blue-domed roof, terraces that cascaded down toward the caldera with views so breathtaking they didn't seem real. Bougainvillea spilled over every surface in shocks of magenta, and the infinity pool seemed to pour directly into the Aegean Sea. The problem was that it was romantic, aggressively, undeniably romantic. And there was, as promised, only one bedroom. Kimberly stood on the main terrace, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and rose, and tried not to think about the king-size bed she'd glimpsed through the French doors. The bed covered in white linens and scattered with rose petals, because apparently the staff had been instructed to lean into the honeymoon aesthetic. They really committed to the bit, Richard said from behind her. She turned to find him holding two champagne flutes, still in his travel clothes, looking amused and slightly horrified in equal measure. There are rose petals on the bed, Kimberly said. I saw. And candles everywhere. At least a dozen. And is that a bottle of massage oil on the nightstand? Richard's mouth twitched. Lavender scented, apparently. Oh my God. We could burn the place down. Collect the insurance money. Despite everything, Kimberly laughed. Your board would love that headline. Billionaire burns down honeymoon villa. Newlyweds commit arson rather than face romance. He handed her a champagne flute. At least they have good taste in alcohol. She took a sip. It was perfect, of course. Everything here was perfect, which somehow made it worse. I'll take the couch, Richard said, reading her mind. Honey, for 2 weeks? Richard, you'll destroy your back. I've slept in worse places. Name one. Airport lounges, the office floor during the Microsoft acquisition, a train station in Prague when I missed my connection. Why were you in Prague? Long story involving a very bad investment in cryptocurrency. He leaned against the terrace railing beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The point is, I'll be fine. Kimberly studied him, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he was already mentally preparing to be uncomfortable rather than make her uneasy. Something warm bloomed in her chest. We're adults, she said carefully. We can share a bed without it meaning anything. Richard's champagne glass paused halfway to his mouth. Kimberly, I'm serious. It's enormous. We could fit 3 people in there and never touch. Now you take your side, I'll take mine. We'll build a pillow wall if it makes you feel better. That's not, he stopped, seeming to struggle with words. I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't. I feel practical. She met his eyes. You promised 2 weeks of actually being present. That's going to be hard if you're sleep-deprived and cranky from the world's most expensive couch. I'm always cranky. More cranky then? Richard was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking through it with that analytical mind of his, weighing pros and cons like it was a business decision. Pillow wall, he finally said. The Great Wall of Pillows. Impenetrable. Berlin wishes. He smiled then, and something in the air between them shifted. Lighter, easier. Okay, Richard said. We'll share the bed. Platonically. Completely platonically. Like roommates. The most platonic roommates in the history of arranged marriages. Kimberly raised her glass. To platonic cohabitation. Richard clinked his glass against hers, and the sound rang out clear and bright over the darkening sea. To 2 weeks of pretending we know what we're doing. They drank, and Kimberly tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with champagne bubbles. Day 2 began with a miscalculation. Kimberly woke to sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains and the warm weight of something across her waist. Her sleep-fogged brain took a moment to process. That was an arm. A distinctly male muscular arm wrapped around her middle. Richard's arm. She froze, suddenly hyper-aware of every point of contact. Her back pressed against his chest, his breath warm against her neck. His body curved around hers like they'd been sleeping this way for years instead of accidentally breaching their pillow wall sometime in the night. The pillows were scattered across the floor. So much for impenetrable. Kimberly's heart hammered as she tried to figure out how to extract herself without waking him. But then Richard stirred, and she felt the exact moment he realized their position because his entire body went rigid. I'm sorry, he said immediately, pulling away so fast he nearly fell off the bed. I don't know how. It's fine. Kimberly said quickly, sitting up and trying to sound casual, despite the fact that her skin was still tingling everywhere he touched. We were asleep. Well, bodies do weird things when we're unconscious. That's not an excuse. Richard, breathe. Nothing happened. She turned to look at him and found him sitting on the edge of the bed, running both hands through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. Hey, really, it's okay. I promised you wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And I don't. She wasn't sure if that was entirely true. Uncomfortable wasn't quite the right word for the complicated tangle of feelings currently short-circuiting her brain. But he looked so genuinely upset that she wanted to ease his mind. I actually, I slept really well. Richard glanced at her over his shoulder. Yeah? Best sleep I've had in weeks, honestly. She bit her lip. You're weirdly comfortable to sleep next to. Don't let it go to your head. Some of the tension bled from his shoulders. I won't tell anyone if you won't. Deal. He stood, and Kimberly tried very hard not to notice that he slept in just a t-shirt and boxer briefs. Gray boxer briefs that fit him unfairly well. She looked away quickly, face heating. I'm going to shower, Richard announced, already heading for the bathroom like he needed to escape. Then maybe we could, I don't know, explore the island? Do honeymoon things? Honeymoon things, Kimberly repeated, amused. You know, tourist activities, taking photos the board will leak to the press, pretending we're in love. Sounds romantic. It sounds like work. Everything sounds like work to you. He paused in the bathroom doorway, and when he looked back at her, something in his expression made her breath catch. Not everything. Then he disappeared into the bathroom, leaving Kimberly alone with her racing thoughts and the lingering warmth of his arm around her waist. They rented a scooter. It was Kimberly's idea, and Richard had looked at her like she'd suggested they base jump off the caldera. You want me to drive a scooter? He said flatly. Yes. In Greece. That's where we are. Yes. Kimberly, I have a chauffeur for a reason. Because you're a control freak who doesn't trust anyone else to drive. Because I'm efficient with my time and prefer not to die in vehicular accidents. She crossed her arms. Can you even drive? Of course I can drive. When was the last time you drove anything? Richard opened his mouth and closed it. That's irrelevant. It's completely relevant. Come on, Ashford, live a little. She dangled the rental keys in front of him. Unless the big bad billionaire is scared of a little scooter. I'm not scared. Prove it. His eyes narrowed in a way that probably terrified his board members, but just made Kimberly want to laugh. Fine, but when we crash into a donkey, I'm saying I told you so. If we crash into a donkey, you can say whatever you want. 20 minutes later, they were speeding along the coastal road. Well, speeding was generous. Richard drove the scooter like it was a ticking bomb, with Kimberly's arms wrapped around his waist and her chin hooked over his shoulder. You can go faster than 15 kilometers an hour, she shouted over the wind. I'm being cautious. You're being ridiculous. There are no lane markings. That's part of the charm. Despite his protests, Kimberly felt him relax incrementally. His shoulders loosened. His death grip on the handlebars eased. And when they rounded a curve that opened up to a stunning view of the sea, she heard him laugh, surprised and genuine. Okay, he admitted, this is actually kind of nice. See, was I right or was I right? Don't get cocky. She grinned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with sea salt and sunshine, and thought, I could get used to this. They stopped in Oya for lunch, a tiny taverna clinging to the cliff face, all blue tables and white chairs, the owner's cat sunbathing on the bar. Richard ordered in flawless Greek, which surprised her. You speak Greek? Kimberly asked as the owner brought them wine and bread. I speak 7 languages. It's useful for business. Of course it's for business. She tore off a piece of bread. Do you do anything just for fun? I'm here. And aren't I? Under duress from your board. True. He poured them both wine, and she noticed he'd rolled up his sleeves to his elbows, his forearms tanned and distractingly muscular. But I'm not hating it. Wow, high praise from Richard Ashford. I'm being sincere. I know that's what makes it notable. She studied him across the table, relaxed in a way she'd never seen, the perpetual tension in his jaw finally gone. You look different here. Different how? Younger. Happier. She tilted her head. Like maybe you're not constantly calculating the next 10 moves in some elaborate chess game. Richard was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in his glass. That's what my life has been for so long. Every conversation, every relationship, every decision, it all had strategy behind it. I forgot how to just be. And now? Now I'm sitting in Greece with my wife, eating bread that's probably older than both of us combined, and I'm not thinking about the company at all. He met her eyes. It's terrifying. Why terrifying? Because I don't know who I am when I'm not working. Kimberly reached across the table and touched his hand. Just briefly. Just enough. Maybe that's what these 2 weeks are for. Figuring out who Richard Ashford is when he's not being a billionaire. His fingers twitched under hers like he wanted to hold on but didn't quite dare. And who do you think I am? I don't know yet. She pulled back, smiling. But I'm looking forward to finding out. The days began to blur together in the best way. They fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings on the terrace with coffee and fresh pastries from the bakery down the hill. Afternoons exploring, hidden beaches, ancient ruins, tiny villages where tourists never ventured. Evenings cooking together in the villa's kitchen because they discovered that neither of them could cook, but trying was half the fun. Richard burned everything. Kimberly over-seasoned everything. They ordered takeout most nights and called it a learning experience. And every night they climbed into that enormous bed with their pillow wall, only to wake up tangled together, closer than before. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them pulled away. On day 5, they were swimming in the infinity pool when Kimberly dunked Richard underwater. He came up sputtering, looking outraged and surprised and completely undone in a way that made her heart stumble. That was assault, he said, slicking his hair back. Yeah, that was fun. Those are not the same thing. They should be. She splashed him again, laughing at his expression. Richard's eyes narrowed in a way that should have warned her. You're going to regret that. Am I? Absolutely. He dove for her, and suddenly they were wrestling in the water like children, all laughter and shrieking and hands on wet skin. He caught her around the waist, pulling her against him, and they both went still. They were chest to chest. Her legs had wrapped around his waist instinctively. His hands spanned her rib cage. Their faces were inches apart, water droplets caught in his eyelashes. His gray eyes dark and intense and locked on hers. Kimberly, he said, voice rough. Yeah? I think I'm breaking the roommate rule. What rule? The one where I don't think about kissing you. Her breath caught. How you think about kissing me? Constantly. His thumb traced an arc across her ribs and she shivered despite the warm water. It's becoming a problem. Why is it a problem? Because you didn't sign up for this. For me wanting... He stopped himself. Wanting what? Richard closed his eyes like he was in pain. You. I want you. And I know that's not fair because this whole thing was supposed to be... Kimberly kissed him. She didn't think about it, didn't analyze or strategize or worry about consequences. She just leaned in and pressed her mouth to his, and the world narrowed to the point of contact. For a heartbeat, Richard didn't move. Then he made a sound low in his chest, something between a groan and surrender, and kissed her back. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was desperate and raw, and months of tension finally snapping. And his hand cupped the back of her head, fingers threading through her wet hair, her nails dug into his shoulders. They kissed like they were drowning, and each other was air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Richard pressed his forehead against hers. "What are we doing?" he whispered. "I don't know," Kimberly admitted, "but I don't want to stop. We should talk about this. Probably. Set boundaries. Definitely. Be responsible adults. Absolutely." Neither of them moved. Then Richard kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, like he was memorizing the taste of her. And Kimberly let herself fall into it, let herself want this complicated, frustrating, surprisingly tender man who was somehow becoming more than just her husband on paper. When they finally pulled away, the sun was setting, painting everything gold. "So," Richard said, still holding her, "I think we need to renegotiate our arrangement." "What did you have in mind?" His smile was soft, vulnerable, real. "I have no idea, but I'd like to figure it out. With you." Kimberly's heart felt too big for her chest. "Yeah, me too." They stayed in the pool until the stars came out, holding each other, talking quietly, stealing kisses like teenagers. And when they finally went inside, the pillow wall stayed on the floor. Dear viewers, what happens next will blow your minds. Let's watch out for what happens next in part